Deep in the heart of an abandoned land, at the end of a winding forest road, stood a mansion with an ominous presence, Shadow Hill. Despite its gothic beauty, the mansion had a terrifying reputation. Everyone in town knew that something nightmarish had happened at Shadow Hill, but they were afraid to speak of it. Led by fate, the Carter family moved to Shadow Hill. Henry, his wife Catherine, and their three children, Sarah, Michael, and little Emmy, left their life in the big city in search of a new beginning. Henry and Catherine were united by a love story that began in their youth, envied by many. With the addition of the children, they appeared to be the ideal family, brimming with love and happiness from the outside. Who could say they were anything but happy? Yet, what lurked behind this facade of happiness? The first week in the mansion passed without incident. Henry, a successful lawyer, became increasingly absorbed in his work, becoming gruffer and more irritable than ever before. He was no longer the loving father his children knew. As time passed, Henry's behavior became even stranger. He often woke up in the middle of the night, speaking to someone he called the old tenant, though no one else saw or heard them. Catherine, worried, tried to talk to him. Henry insisted everything was fine, but Catherine no longer saw the husband she once knew in his eyes. She began to suspect that he might be possessed by some malevolent force tied to the mansion. Meanwhile, the children started noticing odd phenomena around the house. Sarah, the eldest, discovered a bundle of old letters in the attic. They were from a previous owner of Shadow Hill, a solitary man who had written about terrifying events that occurred in the house. In the letters, he spoke of voices tormenting him, dark figures watching him from the corners of the house, and his own growing madness and rage. One day, Henry disappeared without a trace. The police searched everywhere but found no sign of him. Catherine and the children were left alone in the eerie Shadow Hill mansion. The situation worsened when inexplicable and terrifying events began occurring. Objects moved on their own, sounds of footsteps echoed in empty rooms, and whispering voices were heard in the dark. However, the most terrifying discovery came when Sarah read further into the old letters, finding a passage that read, "The old tenant will return to reclaim the house." These words echoed in Sarah's mind. Could her father have become the old tenant? She tried to confront her mother with this horrifying hypothesis, but Catherine refused to believe it. Then one night, the front door opened with an eerie creak. Henry was back, but he was no longer the man they knew. His eyes were cold and empty, his face pale as a corpse. He advanced towards his family with a terrifying expression. Catherine, Sarah, Michael, and Amy were paralyzed with fear. Henry raised a hand, pointing at them, and with a hoarse voice whispered, "This house is mine." However, driven by deep love for her children, Catherine found the courage to confront him, or whoever was in his body.
"No, Henry. This is our house, and we will fight for it."
The battle for Shadow Hill had just begun. The Carter family, united as never before, had to face the darkness that had taken possession of their beloved father and husband. But was it truly Henry who had returned, or just a shadow of what he once was, possessed by an ancient evil spirit? The Carter family watched in horror as Henry, or whatever remained of him, advanced towards them with a malicious grin. Their hearts filled with terror, but they knew they could not let this demon destroy them. Catherine grabbed a bronze candlestick from a nearby table and hurled it at Henry. He hit the wall with a grunt of surprise and stopped for a moment, long enough for Catherine and the children to escape and lock themselves in a room upstairs. Bolted inside, they heard Henry banging violently on the door, his voice echoing throughout the house, a disturbing and sinister laugh that chilled their blood. But in the end, the house returned to a ghostly silence. The next morning, as the sun timidly rose on the horizon, the father was gone. The house was a mess, furniture overturned, glass shattered, and strange symbols drawn with chalk smeared on the walls. The Carter family called the police, who arrived and documented the surreal scene. Investigations were opened, but Henry remained untraceable. After weeks of fruitless searches, the case was closed. Catherine and the children were forced to face a new life without their beloved father and husband. But Catherine, even among her fears, felt that the story was not over. Henry's shadow still hovered over Shadow Hill, and she felt she had to go back to find the truth. "I can't let the story end here," she told the children one day.
I need to find out what happened to your father.
Catherine was uncertain of what she might find, but she was determined. She knew it was a risk that might reopen old wounds, but she couldn't abandon Henry, whatever he had become. So, with the courage of a mother and the heart of a warrior, Catherine decided to face the darkness of Shadow Hill again, to provide answers to unanswered questions and find, if possible, a way to free the tormented soul of her beloved. The mansion of Shadow Hill still guarded its dark secrets. When Catherine and the children crossed its threshold again, no one knew what they would face or what horrors awaited them. But they knew one thing: love and the bond of family were their greatest weapons against the darkest of shadows. The new battle for Shadow Hill was about to begin.